Every day of the year here at Merriam Pianos, we talk to students, parents, and teachers about what they should be looking for in a great upright piano. It may seem like we're increasingly living in a world of digital everything, but believe it or not, upright pianos are still going strong and are an incredibly popular option for people who are mid to high level players and squeeze for space. This video is going to speak to the overall qualities and features that you should be looking for in a great upright piano if you're looking for either a first instrument or upgrading from a digital piano. Now, first on my list is how accurate and sensitive the physical action on the instrument is. Now, how do you test that and measure it? Well, obviously, if you're an experienced player, you can sit down and you can know that within an instant. But for somebody who's a little less experienced, here's what I'd be listening for. Playing from the bottom to the top of the instrument, how consistent does each key feel compared to the one next to it? And how easy is it for me to play something that's very quiet, medium, or loud with predictable control? The ideal, of course, is that on a great piano, every key is going to respond basically the same, with a slightly heavier touch needed to play the lower half of the instrument than the other half of the instrument. And the concept, of course, is if you play one key with 50% of your maximum pressure, and it's going to give you, say, 50% of its maximum volume, then if you move and replicate that same motion on another key, you're going to get the same reaction from the piano. Now, the second item on our list is the same, but instead of touch, we're talking about tone. As you play the instrument from the bottom up to the top or top down, are you hearing a lot of different characters in the sound from one note to another? Does one sound sharper than the other unexpectedly? Does one sound brassier or dull out of nowhere? In a great piano, grand or upright, but in this case the uprights we're talking about, we want a nice smooth curve. It's okay if there's a bit of transition from something that sounds a little more brassy in the lower end to something that's nice and round in the mid to something that's got maybe a little bit more punch in the treble, but there needs to be nice gradual transitions in those characters, and you probably don't want a piano where those characters are particularly too far apart. Now again, this can be influenced by something called voicing to an extent, but there's a lot inherent in the piano's design, the quality, and the materials they've used that contribute to that evenness. Number 3 is something called sustain. Now, sustain is pretty well what it sounds like, which is how long after you play a note will that note keep ringing for or sustaining for. Now, there's no specific time in seconds where it's universally considered good or bad. But generally speaking, a great piano should be able to sustain well beyond the 15-second mark, and the sustain should be fairly even whether you're playing something in the bass, the treble, or in the mid-range tenor. Not only that, but the whole shape of the note from the point you play it to the point that it stops ringing should be a fairly smooth ski slope down. Next up is the dynamic range of the instrument. And when we say dynamic range, we're really talking about how soft and how loud the instrument is able to play, and how well you can control that volume differential. More importantly, does the quality of the sound seem just as good when you're playing quietly as when you're playing loudly? It's very easy to get a loud, brash sound out of almost any piano, but generally, cheaper or poorer quality pianos are going to have a distortion as well as a very steep drop off in volume within the first second or two, whereas better pianos, you can play quite loudly and there doesn't sound like there's any distortion, and it's a nice even fall off from that moment of attack. You'll sometimes hear people talk about bell-like tone. Well, sometimes they're talking about the timbre, but I like to think of a bell-like tone as more of a behavior. As you strike a bell, there's a very slight growth in the tone before it starts to taper off nice and smoothly, and the tone is uniform throughout that entire sustain. Next is great tuning stability and overall durability of the instrument. Now, tuning stability is important because nobody wants a piano to cost more than is necessary in order to maintain it and be able to play it well. And if you're purchasing an upright piano for a student, chances are this instrument's getting used on a daily basis, sometimes for several hours. Good tuning is normally a function of several other design and construction elements coming together. One is how well aged and the quality of the soundboard and the soundboard ribs that they've used, which doesn't sound like it would be connected to tuning stability, but in fact, the soundboard creates a slight curvature that the strings are pushing up against. And so the less stable the soundboard is, the more that curve is actually moving in and out with temperature and humidity fluctuations and really dramatically affecting the tuning. The second could be the quality of the strings. Strings which are less pure or which have slight variations or cavities in the side of it may stretch and flex in uneven ways. And then 3, good old-fashioned construction quality. If the holes for the tuning pins haven't been drilled perfectly, if the pin block, which is the piece of wood that the tuning pins are drilled into, isn't super stable and properly cured, or if you're using a cheap tuning pin, any one of those things might contribute to unwanted movement in the pin, which can of course require additional tunings. Then the last element really has to do with the overall consistency of every aspect of the piano. And this is where brand and model reputation does come into play. Because while a talented technician can take almost any instrument and make it sound pretty good with enough time, the better the instrument and better the raw goods are that you're working with, the longer those tweaks and improvements will last. We've actually spoken to a number of customers who have come to us after purchasing fairly low-end instruments. We're very happy with it at the first, and now they've called into our service department to try and ask what's wrong with the instrument because it doesn't play or sound like it did when they first bought it. And in a lot of cases, that instrument has basically been pumped up on steroids for a period of time, but the quality and the stability of the materials just didn't allow those improvements to last very long. So you want to get something where there's a proven track record and a lot of years of people talking about the stability and long-term enjoyment and playability of those instruments. So if we're talking about those manufacturers that do produce some great student level or above instruments, obviously we've got our 2 bellwether examples, Kawai and Yamaha, whose Japanese-made products have great reputations. Then there are also some Indonesian factories, and from a musical reputation standpoint, I would say Kawai and Samick probably lead the pack here. And then even some of the higher-end Chinese factories, which are really starting to produce some great product, such as the higher-end Rittmüllers, some of the top-end Heilun, and some of the European Chinese hybrids, such as the Friedel and Schimmel, Steinway's Essex, or Bechstein's Zimmermann. There are numerous model examples from those manufacturers that I've listed that are going to deliver a great musical experience for a budget that should be accessible for most families. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. We really wish you the very best of luck in all of your shopping and your research, and we're glad that you stopped by here to see us on Merriam Pianos on YouTube. My name is Stu Harrison. Please consider hitting that subscribe button if you are just joining us for the first time, and we'll see you again soon.